Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Again, thank you all for joining us for our Phi Alpha Delta Professional Series webinar series. We really appreciate you coming. Tonight's topic is how to become a judge, what it's like to be a judge or hearing officer. And we have a great panel of distinguished Phi Alpha Delta members. We have Judge Andrew Bain, Judge John Weaver, and Judge Kim Gallant. So I'm going to start off with Judge Bain and have you, introduce yourself, give us a little bit about your background and just kind of how you became a judge, and then we'll move on.
All right. Well, my name is Andrew Bain. I started my judge journey about now almost 18 months ago. I first applied to be a judge in the Ninth Circuit of Orange and Osceola County. And I worked the appointment process until I was appointed last summer to be a Orange County judge in Florida. And I don't want to take up too much time. The story is really long, but I played in the NFL. I played for the University of Miami Hurricanes, and I played football my whole career. Then I switched to law when I got back from playing football, and I was a prosecutor for about 7 years before becoming a judge. It's a little bit kind of short and sweet of it.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. Judge Gallant, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and how you became a judge?
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm Kim Gallant. I currently serve the fraternity as an elected member to our International Tribune. I have been a judge, going on a little more than 5 years now. Like Andrew, I was a prosecutor, did that for about 10 years, and then I went to work for a judge, and then ultimately was appointed as a judge. So I'm appointed as well. I'm a magistrate court judge in Gwinnett County, Georgia. Gwinnett County is one of the suburbs outside of Atlanta. And our magistrate court does a couple of different things. My job is to sit by designation for our superior court. So our superior court are the elected judges that handle all felony criminal matters, divorces, all sorts of civil, domestic kind of cases. But because their dockets are so large, certain magistrates get designated to basically run a second courtroom. And so I, most days, am sitting as a superior court judge. But the cool thing about the appointment process for me is I don't have to run, don't have to campaign, do finance disclosures. I can focus on the work, don't have an office to manage. Of course, that also means I don't really have a staff that supports me. But I get to hear the same kind of cases that the superior court judges do here. But because I'm a magistrate, I also wear a magistrate court hat. And the magistrate court here in Gwinnett County is open 24/7. We're the court that issues the search warrants at 2 a.m. on Christmas Eve morning. We're the ones people come to because they can't get any answers, and people can actually walk off the street, walk into our courtroom, and be face to face with a judge asking their questions. So I do a little bit of that. Most days I do the superior court work, but I am appointed like Andrew. On a personal level, I'm married. I have 2 daughters. Amelia is 13 and Charlotte is 9. They are both in Girl Scouts, and so we are very heavily involved in Girl Scouts. I'm a troop leader, and I tried to serve the fraternity and serve on a couple of other boards as well in my free time. That's me.
Great, thank you. Judge Weaver, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a judge.
Absolutely, and I'll begin by telling you who I am not. I am not 3-term esteemed Chancellor John Weaver of the Knox County Chancery Court. That is my father. And unfortunately, Dad is not a P.A.D brother. I probably need to work on that, but I am your brother, John Weaver Jr., and I am an administrative law judge or hearing officer. Most of us use the term hearing officer just because it's shorter. I work for the state of Tennessee, and my particular circle of ALJs handles the cases that come out of the Tennessee Department of Human Services. If you're not familiar with what that is, in most states, that's the cases that deal with quality of life issues for citizens of the state. So if you didn't read my bio, it's things like your SNAP benefits, family assistance, child support distributions, elderly abuse cases, and child care licensing. It's just a whole gamut of things that affect people's lives that use government assistance. So what an ALJ basically serves as, at least in this state, and I think in most states, is as a judicial function for the executive branch. So I'm not in the judicial branch. I work directly for the governor of the state of Tennessee. So any decisions that come out of the executive can be appealed within the executive branch before you then go on to your to the judicial branch. So we're kind of like a first step, or within the executive. So we like to think of ourselves as being separate, but we are certainly employed by the governor. The way I got to this position, I had been working in family law for almost 10 years, and finding myself sort of disillusioned with my clients, I decided to seek something else. And I saw that the state of Tennessee was looking for an administrative law judge position, and I applied for it like you do any other job. There were many candidates across the state. They were all vetted. Somehow or the other, I made it out, and I had to be appointed by the governor to take the position, which I did, and I've been doing that for a little over 2 years now, and it's a fulfilling career. On the personal note, since Judge Gallant went there, I live here in Knoxville, Tennessee, with my wife, and we have 2 little boys, ages 5 and 3, so they keep us on our toes, and we also are entering the world of scouting, so I'm learning what that's all about.
Great, thank you. My name is Michelle Isherwood. I'm a member of Phi Alpha Delta, and I'll be the moderator for this evening. So if you have questions, please post them in the chat, and we're going to start with some pre-prepared questions, and we'll go through those, and then we'll get to your questions in the chat. Again, it would be great if you have them, and we'll get to them. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to our panel, and we'll get started. So you kind of talked a little bit about your path. What skills what skills and other types of experience that you have do you think were really important for you to move into being a judge or hearing officer? Do you want to start, Judge Gallant?
So for me, like I said, I went to law school to be a prosecutor. So I really didn't plan on becoming a judge. It's just kind of one of those things where a path presented itself to me. I never really thought about it. I went to law school to be a prosecutor. I fully expected to retire as a prosecutor. And that's what I wanted to do, was criminal law, prosecution, that was it. But as life happens, I had to make some decisions. And when I was pregnant with my second child, who just popped in a minute ago to say goodnight, I had to make sort of a quality of life decision. And being a prosecutor, like most jobs as attorneys, it's just one of those jobs you can't leave at 5 o'clock. There was an obligation to victims and to the people. And so I found myself working nights and weekends, breaking work home, and ultimately had to make a quality of life decision and decided to leave prosecution. That left me not ideally being considered as a judge. And frankly, at that point, it wasn't really even something that I had in my sights. What I did is I went to work for a judge. And so I was a staff attorney for a superior court judge for about 4 years. And that gave me the opportunity to learn all of the other areas of law. So while I didn't practice as a domestic attorney or do civil work, working for a judge gave me the opportunity to learn the law, to understand it. And so I think that made me more attractive when it came time for the appointment process, because I had litigation experience as a prosecutor, but I also had the general knowledge under my belt of all the different areas that our courts see. And so the first thing that I think is you need to have a breadth. I think that just makes you more attractive, whether you are seeking an appointment or you're running for election, because you want to be able to tell the people that you're asking to vote for you or the people that you're asking to appoint you, look, I can do this job on day one. Certainly becoming a judge, there's on-the-job training. You got to get your sea legs. It's a very, very different view from the bench than it is from counsel table. But at the same time, I was able to say, look, I've got all of this experience in different areas of the law. You can put me in on day one and I can get started. So that is one thing I would suggest is if you're interested in being a judge, unless you're going to go into something particular, perhaps like Judge Weaver, you might want to consider becoming a well-rounded attorney that knows a little bit about everything.
Great. Judge Bain.
All right, well, and my process is a little bit different than everyone else's here. I was a prosecutor for 7 years, just like Judge Gallant. But as well, while I was doing that, I was deeply involved in my community as well. So I worked with a lot of nonprofits. I started a nonprofit organization in Osceola County, which is South County, just south of where I am now, where we help provide identification documents to indigent people, so state IDs, birth certificates, social security cards, so they can, because you can't get any services, at least in the state of Florida, without a government ID. So that was a big thing about being involved as well. And also, I didn't go straight from, I wasn't a particularly straight from law school student, like I said. So when I left college, I went and played professional football for a while. And then I came back and then started law school and started the process of doing things like that. I was a paralegal at a civil firm. I had no intentions of being a prosecutor. Actually, when I left law school, it was I got really good grades in criminal law, evidence, and criminal procedure. So I was an ideal candidate for the state attorney's office here, which is the prosecuting offices here and where I live, to pick me up. And I ended up loving to work. Like Judge Gallant, I love working with victims. I felt a calling to do justice in my role as a prosecutor. But then I was at a P.A.D. I actually was helping out with the Cherry chapter here, which is with Florida A&M College of Law in Orlando. That's where the Cherry chapter is located. And I was bringing in judges and other attorneys in for an event, and some of my friends that I appeared in front of that later became friends of mine were saying, "Well, you should apply to be a judge." So our application process, I'm not sure about how everybody else was. The process was it's about I think the application itself is about 50 pages long. Then you have to add, writing samples and resumes and all kinds of other documentations, financial disclosures, and all kinds of things to in the appointment process. And then you have to go interview with what they call the Judicial Nomination Commission here in Florida. So each circuit has their own commission. So which is a panel of 9 people. And I was a prosecutor in Osceola County, which is a smaller county to the south of where Orange County is, Disney World and stuff like that. So all the big time attorneys there under my JNC were all those kind of attorneys. And I was this little guy from Osceola County. So my biggest thing was, like I tell everybody that applies to be a judge now, is that you need to tell your story. Tell the people about who you are. Tell them that, I didn't know any lawyers growing up. There were no lawyers in my life. I think the highest professionals in my neighborhood were teachers, maybe some small business owners or a couple of small business owners and things like that. But other than that, I didn't have a conversation with a lawyer until I got to college. While I was at the University of Miami, and I had a business law professor that became a mentor of mine and a great friend. I had no experience with any lawyers. So I'm not the traditional person that went from my parents, or I have grandparents or uncles and aunts or cousins or friends or family that, we're not from where I'm from. So that also helped propel me as a different type of person to prepare the bench, to take the bench. Like I said, you gotta get good grades. Evidence is a big part of what you do as a judge. Obviously, learning different areas of law. You have to be a little bit of a law nerd. to be truthful about it. So I was a prosecutor, but I try to keep up with what was going on the civil side. So like in Florida, we have a big change in our summary judgment standard, and how's that affecting my civil friends at some of these big firms, and we gotta kind of be in there in the little nitty gritty about the Constitution and the constitutions of your different states. Not just what's going on with the U.S. Constitution, but what's going on with the Constitution of your own state. Because our state is always at flux because the people can put forth initiatives and amendments to the Constitution. So on the ballot, when they go to vote, there could be not with no legislative input, other than they can't violate what they call a one purpose standard here in Florida. If the Florida Supreme Court didn't kick it out for that reason, it's going to be on the ballot. Dog racing ended last year. Dog racing had been a part of Florida probably since my great great grandparents were in Tallahassee. So then it ended last year because the people put forth an initiative, they voted, and it passed. So that's how it goes here. So things are always changing, things are always in flux. You have to live the law, and that's the biggest thing about. I think if you want to have a trait that you want to take with you from the practice of law to the next step, if you want to become a judge, is that you really have to love the law and love, really being in the weeds and dealing with really hard issues and things like that.
Great, thank you. How about you, Judge Weaver?
All right. Well, I won't rehash any of the things that Brother Bain and Sister Gallant have said, other than that I would say that yes, being a law nerd is definitely helpful. However, something that I feel has served me very well. I know it's something that served me well when I was practicing with family law clients, and something I really honed there. But also in law school, it's very important, and it sounds basic, but it's the ability to just issue spot. You'll find when you take on clients that you'll hear stories, and the stories will be completely tangential, and they're very important to the clients. But they don't have anything to do with what issues you need to make, or what issues you need to prove to make your client's case. And that's what I find happens, especially since I hear a lot of pro se appellants in my cases. There's a lot of, because these people can't afford attorneys for the most part. Usually the only time I see attorneys is in child support cases. But so this is true of pro se representatives, but it's also true of attorneys, because a lot of attorneys like to put on a show and sort of try to distract you from what the real issues are. When I'm looking at cases, I like to have a mastery of whatever the issues are that would support whatever the administration's decisions were, or would go against those. And so I'm looking for those key things. If I don't hear those things, then generally I understand that the administration's probably made the correct decision. If the appellants make those points that X process wasn't followed, or they didn't receive due notice of something, just very basic. I try to keep it as basic as possible and stick to the issues. And then, of course, there's a certain amount of empathy that goes along with it. As an ALJ, I'm pretty much constrained to what it is written in the rules. I don't get to have a lot of leeway outside of there. But you can't let yourself become complacent and just assume that the administration's correct all the time. You have to go in with a fresh and open mind and think that this isn't going to be just like every other case that came before it. I try to keep an open mind.
Great. So one of the things, obviously, we're all aware of the pandemic. So what impact do you think COVID's had on the judiciary and the court system? And do you see any lasting impacts, any trends or changes that really are going to probably stick after we're able to go back to a new normal or whatever? What kind of things do you see do you think will change with the system the way it is?
So, obviously, we're all Zooming. Court has become Zoom or Teams or WebEx or whatever the case may be. Obviously, we all saw the funny story this weekend with the attorney who was a cat. Thankfully, I haven't had that occur. But court has gone virtual for us. Probably for a period of time, we were not letting anyone into the courthouse. And if there was something that needed to be handled in person, we were setting it out, waiting for the pandemic to subside. Well, here we are almost a year later, and it hasn't quite subsided. So what has changed for us is our volume has slowed. So where we would have a morning calendar of divorces, maybe we'd put 5, 6, 7 divorces on at 9 o'clock and start at the top and work your way down. Now at 9 o'clock, I have one case, maybe 2 that are on the calendar. And if one or both of those resolves, then I don't have anything else to do that morning because we haven't called in all of those backups. So we're still moving cases. We've still got business going on. It's at a slower pace. The volume of the cases I handle on any given day is much less. We're slowly starting to integrate people coming back into the courthouse. And of course, in our state, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, did an emergency order. We haven't had any criminal jury trials, so those have been backing up. We've still had criminal matters handled, bond hearings, first appearances. We've taken guilty pleas. We can still do bench trials, but we haven't brought any juries in. So that's obviously a concern as we hit the 1-year mark, that we've got a lot of criminal jury trials backing up. And the thing I believe will stick with us through this is we've become more efficient with some of the more mundane matters. So legal arguments that would bring in lawyers and the parties just to sit there to hear a legal argument where we weren't necessarily taking testimony, those are being done by Zoom, and they are going much quicker. And so I suspect we will continue to use virtual court as much as we can in the future. Still trying to get people into the courthouse. Obviously, on the criminal side, we've got to get folks back in. But on the civil side, I think we're going to continue to use the virtual hearings even after the pandemic has subsided. Oh, you're muted, Michelle.
Oh,
There it is.
there's always one time in there. Do Judge Weaver or Judge Bain, do either of you have any thoughts on that or that you'd like to share?
I do, and I've had sort of the opposite experience, just because, as far as volume is concerned, because of the type of work that I do, where we've had such high rates of unemployment that people have had to ask for help from their governments. And so I went from hearing probably 40 cases in a week to where I'm now hearing 60 to 80 cases in a week. It's an insane volume. Fortunately, they're mostly one-issue cases, and I can dispose of them fairly quickly. Were it not for the virtual processes that have been instituted, there's no way we could keep up with this. I haven't had an in-person hearing since June or July of last year, and probably only 3 or 4 since March. So it's funny. People tend to be a lot quicker and more efficient when they're on the phone or in a Zoom hearing or something like that. From what I understand, the administration in my state, at least, and probably in many states, is really enjoying this. So I don't think we will ever go back to being majority in-person hearings doing what I do. It's going to probably stay this way unless it's serious fraud cases or something like that, where where you have people in jeopardy.
Great.
Yeah, I think for us in Florida, at least in the cattle call kind of hearings or things like that, are going to be all virtual. I think truly everything's going to stay virtual, except maybe evidentiary hearings where you have witnesses testifying. Even some of those, though, I've done motions with witnesses testifying virtually. So not really those, truly, if it's not a trial with a jury, I don't see for me, at least right now, a path back from having virtual and not having going away from virtual, because for me as a judge, it makes my life so much more efficient than it does in person. I can deal with so many more cases virtually than I could ever in person. Um, I've in Florida, I completed 4 jury trials last year, so we were having jury trials for a little while, and I think we had to stop because of the holiday spike. But I think we're going to go back to having jury trials here in the next few weeks. So we've been moving along, and people have been kind of hesitant, but I think that it's going to stay. I think virtual is going to stay for our court system. I think it provides more access to people. If people don't have to travel, it's going to kill billings for a lot of firms because they can't bill a client, for what would be really a 10-minute hearing. They can't bill, an hour and a half. That I had to travel and I had to sit in court, wait for my case to get called, and said no, you're going to get your time assigned and you're going to sign on to your hearing, and you can't bill your client for an hour and a half. It's going to be like 0.2, 0.3, those kind of billing. So that's what's going to happen. So it's going to save clients money. But I think it's going to allow firms to make more money because they won't be stuck in my courtroom for the whole afternoon waiting for a calendar call.
Great. So I have one more prepared question, and then we'll open it up to the floor, and we've got quite a few questions in the chat. So what advice would you give someone who's interested in becoming a hearing officer or a judge? Kind of what advice would you have them? Is there skills they should start gathering? Is there a way, what organizations should they get involved in, or anything like that would help someone looking to expand or move their career into more of a hearing officer or a judiciary position?
Go hang out with judges.
Yeah.
There's more. Nothing. Go clerk for a judge if you can get a clerkship. I mean, I clerked for a judge in Texas. I was a 2L in law school. For a whole summer, I was out in Texas clerking for a judge. Look at staff attorney jobs like Judge Gallant, because staff attorneys are essential, especially in what we call superior court judges, what we call circuit court judges here in Florida. They lean on them a lot for writing orders and research and all the issues that come along with being a judge, because judges are the last journalists. That's the truth. I mean, we're the last journalists of Judge Weaver's a little bit different. We're hearing Officer Weaver because he specializes in one little area, but everybody else, we're the last journalists. You get all kinds of good fun, different areas of law, things you would never think about practicing, but you got to hear this case that's in front of you. So that'd be my advice if you want to get a skill. Other than that, don't be that guy or girl that everybody talks about. Protect your reputation, protect your professionalism, your integrity, because you're a public officer at this point. Either I had to run, so I had to run in 2022. I have to run, even though I was appointed. I have to run, so I have the luxury of Judge Gallant. But you don't want to be that. You don't want to be that kind of person. You don't want to be that. You don't want to be the person that people talk about. That you're a subject of bar meetings, cocktail hours, and things like that. You want to, be somebody that somebody respects and they can depend on, to be fair and impartial.
Well, and that's a really good point, because the reputation you create as a practicing attorney is really going to influence how far you go. If you're an ass in court, nobody's going to want to put you on the bench because they don't want to have an ass on the bench, who's a jerk and running things amok. But as far as advice for someone who might actually want to make this a career path, it's going to be networking. And, that's one of the great things of P.A.D. and our fraternity is you have the opportunity to interact and network with lawyers, judges, law students all over the country. but you can also do it in your own community. So any type of leadership program, I know a lot of areas, I have these kind of programs. I graduated from Leadership Gwinnett and Leadership DeKalb. DeKalb County is another suburb outside of Atlanta. And that really opened a lot of doors. I got to meet a lot of people in other industries who I never would have crossed paths, but they know people who know people. And, you know, you start getting your name out there and people start knowing who you are, both from your reputation as a practicing attorney, but also through these networking, serving on boards, and giving back to the community. Because as Andrew said, you know, as a judge, you are a servant to the public. And so doing those service on nonprofit boards or go into those sort of events, gets your name out there. You're already looked at as a person who gives back. And it can be sort of a logical next step when they, either the people, the citizens go into the polls or to the folks who do the appointment. When your name comes up, it's not a foreign idea. It's like, oh yeah, why hadn't we thought about that before? We see her at all these leadership events. We see her on these boards serving the community. And so networking really is a huge part of it. And for me in particular, because I thought I would be a prosecutor for my entire career, a door opened that put me on the path to be a judge. And I never would have even noticed the door opening, but for the things that I was doing in the leadership organization and serving on boards. And somebody said something to somebody who said something to someone. And it was like, oh, why don't you think about this? And it's like, well, why don't I think about this? And, you know, 5-6 years later, here I am.
And I'll piggyback on that, and I think that's very important. I also have actively participated in social organizations in my local area, and things like leadership and just different boards that are well known and have well networked people on them. However, what I'd like to hammer on very hard is your comportment within the bar itself, and I don't mean just the way you hold yourself out in public. I mean in your dealings with other attorneys and how they perceive you. I think is the most important thing that, well, to me, that's the thing that's probably helped me the most. Because I was perceived as a logical person who's willing to work with the other side and not someone who's just out there to score every single win every time, despite the cost, meant that I made alliances with very respected older attorneys who everyone knows, and most likely the person. And this has happened to me several times where the person who I was doing an interview with had worked for one of the people who was willing to put themselves down as a reference on my resume. And that was because I tried to be a reasonable litigant, and that has served me very well. And I won't berate the point.
Great. There's some great questions in the chat. So I want to get to these. I really like this one. What was or were the hardest transition or transitions you have found crossing over from attorney to a judge?
I'll jump on that one very quickly, and it's one of the things that I thought would be a big blessing, and it has been to an extent, but it's also been sort of very hard to manage, and that is the judicial code of conduct and the prohibitions that are contained within it, and particularly how I am not supposed to give legal advice to people. And so I love that now all of a sudden friends that I hadn't seen since high school, when they would ask me for advice, I could say, well, I'm prohibited by the judicial code of conduct from giving legal advice. But at the same time, there are friends of mine who I really, really want to help, and I'll figure out ways to do that. But so it's both a blessing and a curse. And I found that just getting in that mindset, not being willing to just jump in and solve people's problems that was probably one of the more difficult transitions.
So a couple of things for me. The first one is my poker face. When you are on the bench, I have realized that I had more facial expressions than I realized. And so I have had to learn how to try to control it. And Probably 4 or 5 years ago, you would have wanted to play poker with me because you would have taken all my money. But I've gotten a little bit better at that in trying to maintain. The deputies that work my courtroom every day, they can still read my face, but for the most part, I've gotten better at hiding things. The other thing for me is I still sometimes forget I'm not one of the lawyers. And so I probably have what you call a hot bench, because I will ask a lot of questions, and I have found myself sometimes taking over, especially on the cross-examination side, because I miss that a lot. And I have to remind myself to sit back and stay in my lane because I'm not the lawyer anymore. And I certainly will share if I have questions, and give litigants an opportunity to educate me if I'm concerned about something or I'm questioning something. But I have to really watch opening that door and just diving in and going back into litigation mode. I have to take a step back. So for me, it's poker face and remembering I'm not one of the practicing lawyers in the case.
I guess the only thing that I would add is that I had to take a step back and realize that I'm like this is like kind of piggyback on Judge Gallant, that I'm not a practicing attorney here in this particular case, but to take it a little step forward, like further than that, that I know that they're doing it wrong. I can see that they're doing it wrong. Like, and I'm like, the reason I'm a judge is because like I was really good at this. And you just gotta kind of sit there and watch it happen, and and it's like really frustrating because you're like, but you just sit there and watch the train wreck, the two trains collide while you just gotta sit there and watch it happen. That was the hardest thing. I still do have a hot bench when I'm doing motions. When it comes to legal arguments, I don't get involved with the like evidentiary parts of it, but I still have a hot bench. I ask a lot of questions because I want that person to answer. I want them to deal with the issue. Like we hear Officer Weaver would tell you that people try to avoid the issue. Like, you're not going to avoid the issue in my courtroom. I'm going to ask questions directly to the heart of the issue that we're here for, and I need answers if you want me to rule on this case. So that's what it is. But that's one of the things that was a hard transition. But the view is great though. Because you're like an eagle up there on the bench. The view is awesome, but you kind of see everything happening and all the little things going on. The view is great, but that's the hardest transition part. That not keeping the lawyers up to my standard. What I kept myself up to was really one of the harder things.
Right. I think Judge Bain, this is really for you. They since you had mentioned that you have to run for election. What's that kind of like? I guess now it's 2021. You're probably starting to think about it. Are there concerns about what is it going to be like to campaign? Job security, that sort of thing. Are there, what's that kind of world like when you're currently sitting on the bench, but now your second job is going to be running and keeping the first job?
Yeah. We have qualifying. I think it's the last week in April next year. It's the last time somebody can put in to run against me. So before then, like I said, a big part I said, don't be that guy. I was a prosecutor for 7 years. I was tough, but nobody could never say I wasn't fair. Any defense attorney that ever worked with me, never was, except one. And she unfortunately passed away like about a few years ago. And I think it was more because I was trying to like help her, and she didn't understand that I was trying to do that. And she took it as an offense, and I was like, no, the law requires that I do these X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't. I can't just do what I want to do. That's not how this works. But she thought I was as a personal thing with her. But other than that, we just really want to get out there, be involved in the community. Like right before I came here, I was at a mock trial I was training up, middle school, high school kids. We're doing a little mock trial with them next week. So, working with them, trying to get them involved in the law, just being out there in the community. And, you got to have your money together. Not only just because we have campaign limitations here in Florida. So only a person can only give you $1,000. So, you can't raise a significant amount of money that way. Really, you have to get large groups of people to give you $1,000 to raise, large amounts of money. So a lot of that money I'm going to put up myself. So I already strategically started, my finances and things like that to allow me to put, if I had to put, forth a good amount of money in campaigning that I could. But as if somebody runs against me, we'll see. I don't anticipate somebody running against me, but anything's possible.
Well, and that brings up a good point. Another thing about becoming a judge is all of a sudden you can't have any opinions, or you can't have any public opinions. And so my boss is elected. So there's the chief magistrate. She has to run for every 4 years, but I don't. But I can't help her because I can't have an opinion. And then now, as I'm progressing in my career, several of my friends, close friends, have decided they want to run. And so they have campaigned to be a judge. And again, I have to sit on the sidelines. And that's been really hard. And we obviously, Georgia had a lot of spotlight in this past election cycle. And, it's hard to sit on your hands. You can't, I have to be very mindful of my Facebook page. Anything that is in writing, which friends, that you can talk about some things with, but 90% of the time I can't. And that's been really hard. And so even, now if I wanted to support Judge Bain and, try to send some money or votes down his way, there's things that I can't do. And that's hard being on the sideline again, especially when you have such a vested interest in a lot of the outcomes.
Oh yeah, like you are a person of no political beliefs and
Exactly.
or opinions. So somebody's like, how's it going with a presidential election? It was an election.
Well, and
that's about the end of your conversation. Like it was an election. We have a new president.
Which is a blessing and a sword, right? You're like, oh, we don't have to talk about it. I can't talk about it. But I actually, once I got appointed, I started pulling nonpartisan ballots. I don't even pull a Republican or a Democrat ballot anymore. I pull nonpartisan just so there's no appearance of any leaning one way or the other. And so those kind of things have changed.
Yeah. Well, Florida, that's our Florida Supreme Court, in an opinion they wrote, I want to say now about 5 or 6 years ago, clearly said, I mean, it was a kind of a hinted thing, but they kind of clearly said, no, every judge needs to write a nonpartisan affiliate, and that's it. We're done. You can't be in any campaign events. Don't even look that way. Is basically what the opinion said. They made it very clear that you're a nonpartisan affiliate. You cannot register independent, Democrat, Republican, all of that is nonpartisan affiliate.
Great. And then we have a question. Somebody asked, is there anything in a person's background that should cause them to second guess wanting to become a judge? Or I guess that would make it more difficult for them if that was if they wanted to become a judge. Is there something in their background that would absolutely prevent it?
Well, I think it depends on if you're being appointed or elected. If you're elected official, other than you committing a felony or some sort, there's really not much that's going to be in your background that's going to prevent you from doing that. If you're being appointed, it's a lot more stringent process. So if you've been divorced because you had an affair, they're going to probably take issue with that, and those kind of things like that, because they're like, well, you violated the law. Because bigamy and all those kind of things like that and adultery are still common law crimes in a lot of these southern states. So they're like, well, you can't really try to point you to be on the bench. But as an elected official, you're just another politician.
And then, do you have any concerns for your personal safety being a judge, and how do you separate yourself from the emotions of the party?
I read that question. I liked that question because I saw who wrote that question. I know he knows the answer to that question, but I'll tackle the first part of that question and then the second part. So the personal safety thing actually has become a concern for me doing what it is that I do because of the dire straits that a lot of the parties find themselves in. Again, fortunately, because of COVID, we're remote. But those 3 or 4 hearings that I had during this last year, these were highly incensed people. And so I had to have an active security staff ready in case something bad happened. Of course, we have security equipment and all of that, but you never know. You never know what's going to happen. As far as separating yourself from the emotions of the people that are in your court, when you practice law, you're going to have to do that as well, or you have to do that as well. If you're already a practicing attorney, you know this. If you're a divorce attorney, you know that your clients are not exactly the most rational people in the world. And it comes back to that issue spotting thing again. You just sort of have to keep your eye on what's important to prove your client's case. And so if you're sitting on the bench, you have to keep your eye on what are the required elements that need to be met in order for one party to prevail over the other, and sort of keep your mind space free of all the drama that will inevitably show up in your court.
Yeah. As far as personal safety, I think you have to just stay vigilant. We all saw a few months back where a federal judge, her home was attacked, and her husband was killed and her son was killed. So it's a real thing. I kind of stay vigilant because I was a prosecutor. So I was vigilant already before becoming a judge. I did cases where people did, life to, 30, 40, 50 years. Some people may feel different, feel bad, feel that I shouldn't have been prosecuting them for that crime, or, that I shouldn't have been doing my job that way. And so I've always stayed vigilant in that manner. In Florida, at least, the judges are allowed to carry firearms in their courtrooms. But yeah, usually I have to stay vigilant with my family. All our stuff is not public record, our addresses and things like that. So, you really want to stay vigilant when it comes to your family safety. As to your emotions of the parties, I'll piggyback with hearing Officer Weaver. It's like an old adage: a man that has himself for an attorney has a fool for an attorney. So if you're going to become the client as well as their attorney, you're going to lose. The other side is going to kick your behind all over the courtroom, because now you just become the client and not the attorney.
So the only security concerns I've had in my career were back when I was a prosecutor. Since taking the bench, I haven't had any personal or close calls, although I've been much more concerned about those things now. Before I took this job, I was actually a city judge. So I was hearing traffic tickets, city ordinances, and buddy, do people get mad about that? And I probably have dealt with the most belligerent folks when I was sitting as a municipal court judge than when I'm taking somebody's kids away or doing something with a felony criminal offense. And so actually, when I was sitting as a municipal court judge, I was escorted to and from my car every time I was on the bench. Now that, I take kids away from parents and I put people in prison for years, nobody cares. It's not that big of a deal. But it's easy to get complacent. And I just, as with me, trying to be mindful of things on Facebook, my husband had to go through sort of a learning curve, not just about the politics, but about posting things on there, and, if we're away or, stuff like that. So it's certainly something in the back of my mind. our sheriff's department, our police department here, I know if I called them and said something's going on, they'd have a car outside my house in a minute. Thankfully, I haven't needed that, but it certainly is a concern. As far as separating yourself from the emotions of the case, it's difficult for me sometimes. And it usually is cases, I've sat in juvenile court for a while. I had a case this past week on Friday that was really difficult. And it wasn't so much the law piece of it, it was the humanity of it. And sometimes it's difficult for me to keep that separation, but you realize you have to stay in your lane. I probably tell myself that 10 times a day. I have to stay in my lane. In order to do my part to make the system work, I have to stay in my lane. But it absolutely affects you emotionally. I saw another question talking about the isolation, and that's a very real thing too. Because back when I was a lawyer, I could call up my girlfriends and we could discuss a case and this is what I think we should do, or I'm thinking about doing that. And now as the judge, I can't do that. I certainly can talk about it with some of the other judges, but my peers, my friends who I trusted, their thoughts and how they assess things when I was a practicing attorney, I can't take it to them. And so it is very isolating, and it can be a burden because there's going to be some cases that work their way through your wall. And as a prosecutor, I mean, I've seen some really bad things, been to some really bad crime scenes. And so you build up sort of a toughness, you build up this wall, but there's always going to be something that just hits you and it can get through, and it's difficult. And you have to, exercise self-care. My girlfriend sent me, a spa little basket this weekend just at the right time because I did have a difficult day in court on Friday. And you just have to practice self-care and to give yourself some grace and to remember to stay in your lane so that you can do your part to make sure the whole system works. But it's difficult sometimes because you're dealing with real people. It's not an episode of Law and Order. It's not Judge Judy. You've got real people in front of you, and the decisions you make really affect their real life. And that's a burden. It's a privilege, and it's a wonderful privilege, and the view is fantastic, but it is also a heavy burden at times, and it can be difficult. So all of that to say, should be something to consider lightly. It's a great job. I wouldn't change it for the world, but you need to have your eyes open about what the full picture of it is.
Yeah, I want to get to that question about isolation. Somebody asked, I understand that you are fairly on your own as a judge, with the exception of your staff. How do you deal with isolation and loneliness as a judge? Judge Weaver, Judge Bain, and could you weigh in on that?
I'm like Judge Weaver. I have a 3 and I have a 4 and 3-year-old. So it's isolation when I get to work, but like as soon as I get home, I am not alone ever. So it's isolating in difference where you used to work in if you're a practicing attorney and you're working in a 1, 2, 3 boutique kind of firm, or if you work, but myself and probably Judge Gallant, we probably came from large state like prosecuting offices. My 30 other counterparts, 40 other counterparts on my floor. So it's lonely in that sense because, you kind of come and show to court, try to come to court, go to court, and when it's done, you kind of go back to your office, sign orders, and then go home. I felt a little isolation at first, but really, I really depend on my family and, my kids and my wife, and they provide a great support system. So, I'm never alone. Somebody tried to open my door a few minutes ago. Never alone.
I'll echo that. That's right. Judge Bain has got it perfectly on the dot, and that is isolation is something I crave. It seems like, especially when this started, they sent us home. Basically, I was holding Zoom meetings from my basement, and my kids were at home, and they were always around. I mean, it was good to get back into the isolation. But I understand the point of the question, though, is how do you be an island? And yeah, your family's help. I always like to maintain a good relationship with people in we'll call it the courthouse, who have nothing to do with what I do, like your security guards when you walk in the door and that sort of thing. Just have be able to just joke around with those folks, that sort of thing, so take your mind off of it for a couple of seconds. But yeah, family helps, and just remaining a person, I think, helps.
Oops, sorry. We have some questions that we may not get to, and I can send them out to the panel and see if we can get some answers. But there's one in here. It says, what's the reality for a second career lawyer to make it to the bench? I'm in law school after a career as a military officer and would really like to know if it's realistic.
I saw that question. I wanted to answer that question even if you hadn't prompted me. And I'm no expert on this, but I think your military career is going to be an excellent asset, especially, well, I mean, in an elected position as well, but I was going to say in an appointed position, because the fact that you've been able to go to law school while maintaining that career, that says a lot about you as an ability, as a person who can handle burdens. And that's one of the things that you need in order to be a judge.
There's no pathway to the bench that, it's all over the place. The people that I serve with are my counterparts that flourishing careers doing something totally different. I just had lunch with a fellow judge on Saturday. He was a stockbroker, basically doing equity trading, Series 7, 66 insurance, 63, those kind of things like that. And then he went to doing pharmaceutical rep while he was in law school. And then he did all these various different jobs as a lawyer. And then now he was appointed to be a judge by our governor. So there's no, like I said, as long as your story is your story and you're willing to own it and share it and, accept it and make that, part of who you are, then there's no difference or a bar to you, to pursuing a role on the bench. Unless you're just too old, which may be a problem in some states.
And then this one's good too. Do you advocate for the use of mediators to settle matters that are before you?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, and I have one more, and it's kind of my favorite because I remember being this way when I started. Where is it? Oh, sorry. I'm going back up. Oh, here it is. When a new lawyer appears before you for the first time, do you take it easy on them?
Absolutely not.
That's one of my favorite questions. I remember those days.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe it's the mama bird in me, but if I see a lawyer struggling, I may throw a few softball, whether it's their first trial or not. Because at the end of the day, I want to get the ruling correct. And so if I don't want a lawyer's performance or their anxiety or whatever's going on with them to impact by getting it right. I will tell you, I had a trial with a kid, I say kid, who was struggling. And I threw him a couple of softballs to try to help him get on track. And God bless him, he didn't figure it out.
So,
and so we struggled, we got through it. And he asked to approach at the end of it. And he had tears in his eyes and told me it was his first trial. And then all of a sudden the light bulb went off and I was like, oh, now I feel kind of bad. But I tried. I had thrown him softballs, trying to help get him on track. It didn't work that well, and he ended up crying, and that made me feel really bad. But, the short answer is no. I agree with Andrew. You don't take it easy on anybody because at the end of the day, you got to get it right. But if someone's struggling, I may pull back the throttle a little bit just because maybe I'm a softie.
Well, I mean, you don't learn. I mean, I don't. My greatest learning moments as a young attorney was crashing and burning in front of a judge I respected, like just straight crash and burning, just like I made that sandwich, and I had to eat it, and you just have to do it that way. I mean, that's what I mean. That's the only way you learn. You don't learn from being the perfect attorney. You don't learn anything. I became a good attorney because I messed it up so bad, like other times, and then I came back and I came back and got it right. And it became better. No different when I play football, or any other sport. You don't learn from winning. You learn from getting your butt kicked. So when you get your butt kicked, you got two choices. You're gonna stay down on the ground and keep getting kicked, or you're gonna get up and fight. So, if you have that characteristic about you, then you're ready to be a trial attorney. And you definitely should be a judge. You definitely have what it is to be a judge. If you're just gonna lay down on the ground, you shouldn't expect things to change. You shouldn't expect things to get better.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Do any of our panelists have any last thoughts they want to share with anyone that before we go? And
No, I mean, if you want this, if you want to be a judge, you want to be a magistrate, you want to be a hearing officer, just go do it. Go out there. I'll say this: I am probably one of the youngest judges appointed in my county. I am the fourth African American judge appointed in my county ever. I'm the third African American male judge appointed in my county. I'm 35 years old. So if you want it, if you want to go do it, go get it.
The only thing I would add is make sure if you want it, you're wanting it for the right reasons. Because it is a job of service and it does have burdens, and just make sure you're honest with yourself about why you want it. Because if you want it just for the title, you may get it, but you're not going to keep it, and you're not going to be well respected if that's really, people are going to see that. And so if it's something that you want, make sure you want it for the right reasons, because you've been given a gift and you need to use it to give back.
Yeah.
That's right. That's true of being an attorney as well. Just to someone, you don't go to law school because the big money truck's going to arrive. You go because you want to advocate for justice, and so you have to keep that in mind. It's the same thing on the bench.
great, thank you. I'd like to thank our panelists, Judge Gallant, Judge Bain, and Judge Weaver, for coming on and sharing your insights and your time with us. I really appreciate it. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming on and spending some time with us and your great questions. Again, thank you all very much. I hope you have a great week. Stay healthy.